Once upon a time, there was a distant world of infinite stars and dimensions, inhabited by countless beings and creatures of all shapes and appearances. No being was identical to another, each possessing its own and unique energetic signature, yet all their souls were connected in one single collective consciousness. Among them were many ethereal beings and light beings of all shades and colors. Some beings could only be perceived as energy spheres or silhouettes, and others appeared to have more solid or liquid bodies. Some of them were young nations, and others were almost as old as the dawn of time. Some civilizations were primitive, and others highly developed in dimensional and space travel technologies. Many cultivated or harvested materials on their home planets for trade with others, and in higher dimensions they had the ability to manifest anything they needed. But all knew that they originated from the source, the original mother cell, and that their souls were fractals of her in the multiverse of their existence. All lived in peace and symbiosis like the cells of one single being pulsing in unison with the source of all life, the heart of the mother cell. Her infinite love, which created the waves in the vast ocean of space, was the source of all vital energy that existed, nourishing her children with light and wisdom. There were no misunderstandings or conflicts because everything was known within the telepathic field of the universal mind. Each soul knew exactly its purpose and function within the great organism they comprised. And there was no need for spoken languages, although some nations enjoyed the use of sounds, chants, or dialects. In times of renewal or growth, a call from the mother cell resonated through the invisible lattice of space that all beings perceived. The wisest and most experienced souls of each nation would then congregate in circles or small councils to plan and oversee the execution of these orders from above. There was a great collaboration between all nations, and the majority of missions had the purpose of education and the expansion of the universal consciousness. All missions were voluntary, and the participants gathered in soul groups according to their essence, abilities, level of evolution, or prior experience. It was their nature to explore and visit other places and civilizations, so there was a constant exchange of curious students and volunteer teachers throughout the cosmic grid. Some beings traveled in plasma spheres, others physically in spaceships. Many practiced astral travel, and others would dematerialize and simply reappear instantly wherever they had focused their attention. Everything was foreseeable and flowing harmoniously, but one day a doubt arose in the universal mind that shook the entire organism. The mother cell wondered what her loyal cells would do if she granted her children the same liberty and power that she possesses to create their own universe. Then she saw that she would have to disconnect them from the telepathic field so they could evolve on their own, and she wondered if their souls would remember their origin and that they were a part of her. Instantly, the greatest mobilization of all times was unleashed, and every cell wanted to participate in this magnificent experiment. New councils and volunteer groups from every corner of the multiverse began to form. One cell offered her body to sustain the new isolated dimension and maintain the life and balance within it. It was one of the youngest cells in the lattice and, like all the others, a fractal of the original mother cell. But it was located at the farthest and darkest horizon of the origin, the perfect conditions to simulate a disconnection from source and welcome volunteer souls for exploration. The builders and architects began to delimit an area and establish the laws and rules that would hold and maintain the experimental space. But this world had such a high density that the volunteer souls would have to decelerate their original frequency and use a physical container or vehicle in order to visit it. And since it was an unprecedented experiment, certain safety measures were taken. To prevent any incidents, the volunteer cell was covered with a protective and insulating veil that would serve at the same time as a container for her inner energy circuit. The veil didn't affect the volunteer cell's connection, but it would protect the rest of the letters from any interferences that could be caused by the decisions of the disconnected souls. And the council agreed to not interfere in the evolution of the avatars unless they endangered the project. No one could foresee what would happen because the veil and the physical experiences would swiftly fade the memories of the incarnated souls until they completely forgot their origin, and there was no manual to guide them in that dimension. All volunteer souls would have to learn through embodied experiences within the duality of their physical reality. Another council of creative souls designed and cultivated a unique ecosystem of flora and fauna with different elements that they had brought from their home planets. It would serve as the energy supply chain to sustain the material life in this dimension of matter. They had created a masterpiece, a planet that sparkled like a precious blue jewel in the darkness of space, and it was named Gaia. Meanwhile, a galactic confederation had formed among the inhabitants of the nearest constellations. Their mission was to oversee and assist the development and well-being of Gaia and her future students. The first congregation bases were established in the star systems of Orion and Sirius because some of their planets possessed portals to the entire multiverse. Volunteer souls from very distant quadrants would have to arrive through these portals at the base for the registration process, and from there initiate the second phase of their journey to Gaia. Most of the involved beings were from nearby constellations such as Andromeda, Alpha Centauri, Vega, Lyra, and their vicinity, and among their inhabitants were many light beings. Tall white, blue, and iridescent beings, small grays, plant-like beings, furry creatures and others with scales, bird-like and feline beings, reptile and crocodile hybrids, mantises of different colors and sizes, and many other fantastic species. But all the civilizations in this quadrant had one common trait. They had humanoid shapes, walked upright, and had 5 limbs: a head, a pair of arms, and a pair of legs. The number of their fingers varied according to the purpose of each species, and a few of them had tails. Most of these beings were androgynous, but there were also races who had genders. Another council was called to create a special vehicle for the volunteer souls, a physical avatar that they could inhabit temporarily during their visits. This design was far more complex because it had to be capable of holding and expressing the power of creation in its duality. The vehicle required a receiver for the original signal of the universal consciousness as an anchor, and at the same time an autonomous internal system disconnected from the telepathic field that would have the intelligence to learn, communicate, navigate, process, and store experiences in the physical dimension, and thus create the experience of free will and individuality. So they took a cell from Gaia as a basis and merged it with the genetic information of 4 species who possessed the required characteristics and had volunteered to co-create the new avatar. They were fascinated and in love with their new hybrid creation, their youngest family member, and named it Human. One of the nations who participated was from the Pleiades, which was also the origin of the volunteer cell Gaia. The others were from the star systems of Sirius, Antares, and Arcturus. They were the first to incarnate in this new dimension of existence, to try out the avatars and build the first physical foundations for study centers on Gaia. And to this day, they are still the vast majority among incarnated teachers. They erected enormous geometric structures on Gaia's meridian points where natural portals existed. These were the energy centers where she had the strongest connections to the mother cell and the multiverse. They built pyramids, temples, and calendars on these vortices that would serve as markers. These places held hidden codes and messages within the architecture to help the incarnated volunteer souls awaken their memory, reconnect to the lattice, and recall the purpose of their existence. Before opening this new cosmic school to all souls who wish to explore the unknown and thus serve the mother cell, cycles, subjects, and study patterns had been designed. But this place was very different. On Gaia existed a linear time with a beginning and an end that distorted perception, something the infinite souls could not yet conceive. The halls of this school were enormous continents, and there was no guarantee of graduating in the first cycle because one had to pass through all levels of physical experience and reach their limit in order to escape the illusion of separation. Such a great amount of beings wanted to experience the feelings and especially the free will that the physical avatar would produce, that a special sub-council for the selection, registration, and incarnation procedure to Gaia was created. Volunteer souls had to appear before this council and state their travel intention and subjects they desired to explore. Based on their request, everything was meticulously planned. First, their book of lives was opened, a kind of logbook where all the achievements and unfinished matters of each incarnations were recorded at the end of each cycle to determine whether the volunteers had completed or had to repeat the lessons. According to the purpose of their journey or level of studies, the exact cosmic window for their incarnation was calculated. The birthplace and genetic makeup of their parents was defined because they provided the gifts and talents that the avatar would need to fulfill its purpose. Soul agreements with teachers and other incarnated volunteer souls were made to initiate the lessons during incarnation. Important life events and geographic energy points were marked as clues to guide the path back to the origin. This way, the students would maintain a balance between their free will and the destiny they agreed upon before incarnation. Since the avatar was a genetic hybrid of Gaia, it still possessed a natural connection to the universal consciousness, but its operating system created so much distortion that it would be very hard for the volunteers to perceive the original signal. Therefore, several additional precautions were taken to help the students find their way out of this challenging labyrinth. One of these was the preparation of the volunteer souls. This consisted of a prior training that simulated the conditions of density and its effects. Markers like symbols, sounds, and smells were imprinted to later activate the memory, and they practiced concentration techniques that would help the volunteers silence the noise produced by their avatar's intelligence system. The portals to this dimension were astral, and denser beings had to leave their bodies at the base to be able to visit it. They had special facilities for this purpose where volunteers would lay in a kind of hibernation capsules and their bodies remained during the entire cycle of incarnation. The volunteers focused a part of their consciousness on Gaia and appeared there. The rest of their being in the capsule remained in a dreamlike state and connected by a silver cord to their avatar. This cord was the channel of communication with the higher self, reminding them of their previous training, and the only connection to the origin that would allow the students to access information from the infinite universal consciousness, receive guidance, or request assistance. Each galactic nation was responsible for its own incarnated children, and it was common for family and friends to accompany them on these journeys to Gaia. Other caring beings supported the volunteers with transmissions from their origins and had the ability to contact or visit them in dreams and visions. Each school cycle on Gaia had a marked end within her linear time, and the souls automatically returned to their bases and awakened in their capsules upon the completion of their cycle. Members of the council would greet them, and after helping them stabilize back to their original vibration, guide the volunteers to their book of lives to record their experiences and review whether they had fulfilled their assigned tasks. Then it was decided whether they continued with the next cycle or repeated it. It was the most difficult school in the multiverse because it could take thousands of cycles to complete it. And within Gaia's distorted time, these cycles seemed eternal compared to the quick journey in the capsule, which lasted only moments in the perception of the volunteer souls upon their return. After their experience in density, they could choose to return to their normal life in the lattice of the multiverse. But despite of all polarities of this new dimension, the vast majority of souls wanted to return and continue their studies. They were fascinated by that world and the possibilities it offered for adventures and the creation of their own reality. And when a being finally graduated, they returned to their family at the origin and shared what they had learned. These courageous souls were celebrated and honored as heroes throughout the entire multiverse because they had overcome duality and managed to enlighten the darkest spaces with their own light. They had proven to the Mother Self that everything born from love eventually returned to love, no matter how far her cells were from the source. They were the pioneers of this experiment, and if they so desired, they could return to Gaia as messengers or temporary teachers. And since then, millions of beings of light have descended to that dimension to explore and co-create in a fantastic world where everything is possible. The extraordinary and unique blue jewel, Gaia.